The 1960s was a golden era of sleek designs and powerful machines, but not every car was a masterpiece. Some missed the mark so badly, they went straight from the showroom to the Hall of Shame. Today we're showcasing the 13 most ugly old cars from the 1960s. From clunky proportions to questionable styling choices, these vehicles are proof that even the best decades had their share of design disasters. Ready to see the worst of the 60s? Let's hit the road. The 1961 Dodge Dart Seneca is a prime example of how bold design choices can sometimes overshadow a vehicle's functionality and intent. Emerging during a period when American automakers were experimenting with radical styling to capture market attention, the Seneca stands as a peculiar case where the ambition of its designers didn't align with the expectations of consumers. As Dodge's entry-level model in the Dart lineup, the Seneca was intended to offer practicality and affordability, but its unconventional aesthetics became its defining, if not infamous, feature. The most striking aspect of the Dodge Dart Seneca was its front-end design, which many have described as aggressive to the point of discomfort. The headlights, positioned high and protruding from the body, gave the car a wide-eyed and almost bug-like appearance. Unlike the restrained integrated headlight design seen on competitors such as Chevrolet or Ford, the Seneca's headlights seemed to leap out of the car's face, disrupting any sense of cohesion. These lights, paired with an enormous, gaping grille that dominated the front fascia, created a visage that many found unsettling. The grille itself stretched nearly the full width of the car and was split into sections by chrome trim, but this did little to soften its aggressive and exaggerated presence. Rather than projecting sophistication or elegance, the Dart Seneca's front end seemed confrontational, almost as if it were sneering at onlookers. Moving along the sides of the car, the design language became less overtly offensive, but no more inspiring. The Dart Seneca's body was largely flat and featureless, with minimal sculpting to add visual interest. The long, straight lines emphasized the car's size, but also gave it a slab-sided appearance, as though the designers had neglected to refine the details. This lack of definition made the car look heavier than it was, detracting from the sense of movement and dynamism that the automotive industry was beginning to embrace in the early 1960s. At the rear, the 1961 Dart Seneca attempted to hold onto the fading tail fin trend that had defined much of the previous decade. The tail fins were subdued compared to the extravagant designs of the late 1950s, but they still felt out of place. Rather than integrating seamlessly with the car's overall shape, these fins appeared tacked on, giving the rear a disjointed look. Combined with simple, uninspired taillights and a lack of chrome embellishment, the rear design failed to provide the sense of resolution that one might expect in a vehicle's styling. The interior of the Seneca reflected its status as a budget model, which was both a strength and a weakness. On the one hand, it was straightforward and functional, aimed at providing reliable transportation without unnecessary frills. However, this simplicity also meant that it lacked the refinement or comfort that buyers in this segment often sought. The dashboard and controls were minimalist but uninspired, with materials that felt cheap even by the standards of the time. While competitors were beginning to incorporate more advanced features and stylish interiors to attract younger buyers, the Seneca's cabin felt like an afterthought. Performance-wise, the Dodge Dart Seneca was a mixed bag. It offered a range of engines from a modest inline-six to a more powerful V8, catering to a variety of buyers. However, even the larger engines struggled to deliver a spirited driving experience, burdened by the car's size and weight. Handling and ride quality were adequate but unremarkable, leaving the car feeling more utilitarian than enjoyable. This was a far cry from the exciting, forward-thinking image that Dodge likely hoped the Dart lineup would project. For contemporary buyers, the Seneca's odd styling and middling performance made it a tough sell, especially in a market where competitors were offering better-looking and more refined vehicles at similar price points. Even within Dodge's own lineup, higher-trim Dart models offered more appealing designs and features, further diminishing the Seneca's appeal. As a result, it quickly became overshadowed and largely forgotten, save for its polarizing design. Looking back, the 1961 Dodge Dart Seneca occupies a unique place in automotive history. It is a car that dared to be different, but perhaps for the wrong reasons. While some enthusiasts now view its quirky styling as an endearing relic of a more experimental era, for many, it remains a reminder of how excessive ambition in design can backfire. In its attempt to stand out, the Seneca ultimately alienated the very buyers it sought to attract, securing its place as one of the more unusual footnotes in Dodge's history. The 1960 Plymouth Fury stands as a testament to the excesses of late 1950s automotive design, a time when bold experimentation with fins, chrome, and sweeping lines ruled the day. Unfortunately, by the dawn of the 1960s, this style was already on its way out, and the Fury's exaggerated features were quickly seen as garish and outdated. While Plymouth had established itself as a brand that offered value-packed, stylish cars, the 1960 Fury became a polarizing model, earning a reputation for its over-the-top design elements, particularly the rear fins. The Fury's rear design was its most striking and divisive feature. The massive, towering fins extended outward and upward, giving the car a spaceship-like silhouette. While tail fins had been a popular trend throughout the late 1950s, Plymouth took the concept to an extreme, resulting in fins that looked cartoonish rather than elegant. The exaggerated size and awkward proportions disrupted the car's overall balance, making it look top-heavy and awkward when viewed from the side or rear. Unlike some competitors whose fins were integrated smoothly into the bodywork, the Fury's fins seemed bolted on, creating a disjointed appearance. The tail fins were complemented, or rather complicated, by the rear lighting arrangement. The taillights were integrated into the base of the fins, a feature that might have been innovative if it hadn't also been awkwardly executed. The lights themselves were small and circular, struggling to make a statement amidst the visual chaos of the fins and heavy chrome trim. The result was a rear end that looked cluttered and lacked the sophistication of rival designs from Chevrolet or Ford. The front of the 1960 Fury didn't fare much better. The wide, toothy grille dominated the car's face, giving it a gaping, almost menacing expression. The grille was flanked by dual headlights encased in bezels that added to the sense of excess. Instead of projecting elegance or sportiness, the Fury's front fascia looked aggressive and overly complicated, as if the designers were trying to cram too many ideas into a single space. The overall effect was more busy than bold, leaving the Fury struggling to find its visual identity. From the side profile, the Fury's problems continued. The car featured a long, flat expanse of sheet metal that lacked the sculpting and detailing needed to break up its visual mass. This slab-sided look made the car appear bulky and cumbersome, especially in an era when competitors were beginning to embrace sleeker, more aerodynamic designs. The Fury's proportions were also at odds with its styling cues, with the tall fins and heavy chrome trim sitting atop a body that seemed unnaturally stretched. Inside, the Fury aimed to provide a futuristic, space-age feel, but the execution left much to be desired. The dashboard was cluttered with an array of knobs, switches, and gauges, many of which were poorly placed or difficult to read. The materials used in the interior didn't live up to the car's price point, with cheap plastics and uninspired upholstery choices detracting from the overall experience. While the cabin was spacious, it lacked the refinement and thoughtful design seen in competitors like the Chevrolet Impala or Ford Galaxy. Mechanically, the 1960 Fury was capable but unremarkable. Plymouth offered a range of engines, including a potent V8, but the car's excessive weight blunted its performance. The suspension provided a soft ride typical of the era, but this came at the cost of handling, which felt floaty and imprecise. The Fury was more about straight-line cruising than spirited driving, which might have been acceptable if its styling hadn't been so polarizing. For many buyers, the 1960 Fury was a bridge too far. While it certainly turned heads, it often did so for the wrong reasons. By 1960, consumer tastes were shifting toward more restrained, modern designs, leaving the Fury looking like a relic of an era that had passed. Sales suffered as a result, and Plymouth quickly moved to tone down the excess in subsequent models. Today, the 1960 Plymouth Fury is a curiosity, an artifact from a time when designers pushed boundaries without always considering practicality or longevity. While some enthusiasts appreciate it for its audacity and as an example of mid-century Americana, For others, it remains a cautionary tale of how too much of a good thing can lead to something that's simply too much. The Fury's fins, chrome, and exaggerated proportions may have once been intended to symbolize progress and optimism, but they ultimately secured its place as one of the most awkward designs of its time. The 1965 AMC Marlin was an ambitious attempt by American Motors Corporation to enter the burgeoning personal luxury car market, but its styling choices left much to be desired. Positioned as a sporty, fastback coupe, the Marlin sought to appeal to younger buyers with a sense of adventure and sophistication. However, the design missed the mark, resulting in a car that many critics and buyers found visually awkward and out of sync with its sporty aspirations. The most glaring issue with the Marlin was its oversized fastback roofline. While fastback designs were popular in the mid-1960s, think Ford Mustang or Chevrolet Corvette, the Marlin's execution felt out of proportion. The roofline extended far past the rear wheels, giving the car a stretched, elongated appearance that seemed more ponderous than sleek. Instead of achieving the aerodynamic elegance seen in some of its competitors, the Marlin's fastback felt bulky, as though it was weighed down by its own ambitions. This disproportionate roofline was compounded by a short front end that didn't balance the car's profile. The hood seemed too stubby compared to the long sweep of the fastback, making the car appear front-heavy. This imbalance gave the Marlin a teardrop silhouette that lacked the visual harmony necessary for a truly sporty look. From the side, the car resembled a mismatched combination of a compact and a full-size vehicle awkwardly fused together. The rear of the Marlin was another sore point. The massive C-pillars, which supported the fastback roof, were excessively broad and ungraceful, creating a visual disconnect between the cabin and the rear deck. This design choice also reduced rear visibility, a practical drawback that compounded the aesthetic issues. City issues. The taillights were small and uninspired, failing to add any flair to the rear end, which otherwise consisted of a flat, unremarkable panel dominated by chrome trim. The front fascia wasn't much better. AMC carried over its corporate grille design, which looked dated even at the time. The split grille and rectangular headlights lacked the aggressiveness or refinement that buyers in the personal luxury segment were looking for. While the chrome accents tried to add a touch of sophistication, they only served to highlight the otherwise uninspired and utilitarian front end. The Marlin's proportions were further undermined by its relatively narrow track width, a consequence of being based on the mid-size AMC Classic platform. This gave the car a somewhat top-heavy appearance, as though the body was too large for the chassis underneath. The narrow stance detracted from the car's visual stability, making it look awkward and ungainly compared to its competitors. Inside, the Marlin fared slightly better, but not enough to redeem its exterior flaws. The cabin was spacious and comfortable, with features aimed at enhancing the personal luxury experience. However, the design of the interior didn't quite match the car's aspirations. Materials were decent, but lacked the premium feel necessary to compete with higher-end offerings from Ford or General Motors. The dashboard and controls were practical, but lacked the flair expected in a car marketed as both sporty and luxurious. Mechanically, the Marlin offered a range of engines, including a 232 cubic inch inline-six and a 327 cubic inch V8, but the performance failed to live up to its fastback styling. The car's weight and underwhelming chassis dynamics meant it wasn't particularly sporty, and its handling leaned more toward the soft, wallowing side typical of mid-1960s American sedans. This disconnect between its sporty appearance and pedestrian driving characteristics further alienated potential buyers. Ultimately, the Marlin's awkward proportions and lack of identity doomed it to be a niche vehicle in an already competitive market. AMC struggled to position the car, marketing it as both a personal luxury coupe and a sporty fastback, but it failed to excel in either category. Buyers who wanted elegance turned to the Ford Thunderbird, while those seeking performance chose the Ford Mustang or Chevrolet Chevelle. Today, the 1965 AMC Marlin is often remembered as a quirky footnote in American automotive history. Enthusiasts appreciate its rarity and the boldness of AMC's attempt to innovate, but the car remains an example of how good intentions and ambitious design can sometimes miss the mark. While not entirely devoid of charm, The Marlin's oversized fastback and mismatched proportions ensure its place as one of the more polarizing designs of its era. The 1961 Citroen Ami 6 is a car that continues to divide opinions decades after its release. Conceived as an affordable yet distinctive bridge between Citroen's barebones 2CV and its luxurious DS, the Ami 6 was bold in its ambition, but polarizing in execution. Its unconventional design choices, especially the infamous reverse slant rear window and peculiar body proportions, have cemented its reputation as one of the most visually jarring cars of its era. The reverse slant rear window was the car's most defining and controversial feature. Citroen claimed it was a functional innovation. By angling the window inward, they ensured that rainwater would not collect on the glass, negating the need for a rear wiper. This design also maximized headroom for rear seat passengers, which was an important consideration for a car positioned as a practical family vehicle. However, the result was visually perplexing. The window looked out of place as if it belonged on a completely different car and created an awkward break in the vehicle's lines. Combined with the tall roofline and short, stubby proportions, it gave the rear of the Ami 6 a top-heavy, almost comical appearance. The front of the car wasn't much better. The Ami 6's face featured twin rectangular headlights housed in slanted, trapezoidal frames, which were meant to look modern, but instead appeared uneven and mismatched with the rest of the car. These headlights sat above a wide, simplistic grille that gave the front end a flat, uninspired look. The juxtaposition of the angular headlight housings and the blunt grille left the car looking perpetually startled, as though it had been caught off guard. The side profile of the Ami 6 presented yet another design puzzle. Its narrow body and tall roofline were intended to provide interior space without adding weight or cost. But the result was a vehicle that looked oddly proportioned. The sharply defined body lines along the sides seemed at odds with the rounded edges of the roof and windows. The rear fenders bulged slightly above the wheel wells, breaking the flow of the otherwise boxy silhouette and adding to the impression that the car's design had been cobbled together from unrelated elements. The car's overall dimensions didn't help its aesthetic appeal. Built on the platform of the diminutive Citroen 2CV, the Ami 6 had a short wheelbase and narrow track, which made it look precariously balanced. It was tall and upright, with minimal overhangs, giving it the visual impression of a rolling shoebox. These proportions were undoubtedly practical, allowing for a roomy cabin and efficient use of space, but they did little to endear the car to those who valued sleekness or style. Inside, the Ami 6 was as Spartan as one might expect from a car derived from the utilitarian 2CV. The dashboard was minimalist, with a single large speedometer and a few basic controls. Citroen emphasized simplicity and ease of maintenance, which meant the interior lacked the refinement or flair often associated with mid-market cars of the era. While the cabin was relatively spacious for its size, with comfortable seating for 4 adults, the awkward exterior design overshadowed any practicality the interior offered. Under the hood, the Ami 6 was powered by a modest 602cc two-cylinder engine shared with the 2CV. This engine was known for its reliability and efficiency, but offered only meager performance. Acceleration was sluggish, and the car struggled at higher speeds, making it best suited for leisurely drives on rural roads. However, the suspension, a hallmark of Citroen engineering, provided a remarkably smooth ride, even on rough surfaces. This innovative suspension system was one of the few aspects of the Ami 6 that received consistent praise. Despite its aesthetic shortcomings, the Ami 6 did find a loyal following, particularly in rural areas of France. Its low price, excellent fuel efficiency, and practical design made it an appealing choice for families and farmers. Citroen leaned into the car's eccentricity, marketing it as a bold and forward-thinking alternative to the more conservative offerings of other manufacturers. For those who valued function over form, the Ami 6 was a practical and reliable workhorse. In retrospect, the Ami 6 is emblematic of Citroen's willingness to take risks and defy convention. It was a car that prioritized practicality and innovation over aesthetics, resulting in a vehicle that was uniquely Citroen, quirky, functional, and utterly unapologetic. While its design may have been polarizing, it has earned a place in automotive history as a symbol of French eccentricity. Today, the Ami 6 is celebrated by enthusiasts as a cult classic, a reminder of an era when carmakers weren't afraid to push the boundaries of design, even if it meant creating something as visually unconventional as the Ami 6. The 1962 Ford Taunus P3, known as the bathtub, Badwan in Germany, is one of those cars that seems to have been conceived with practicality in mind, but ended up as a textbook example of design gone awry. This mid-size sedan, introduced by Ford of Germany, was intended to offer modernity and aerodynamics, yet its rounded, bulbous appearance made it the subject of ridicule. While it was innovative in some respects, its aesthetic choices often overshadowed its merits, earning it a reputation as one of the more awkward-looking cars of the era. The nickname bathtub wasn't just a playful jab, it was an honest assessment of the car's overall shape. The P3's body featured exaggerated curves that made the car look like it had been inflated. The rounded contours extended across the hood, roofline, and trunk, giving it a soft, almost toy-like appearance. This was in stark contrast to the sharper, more angular designs of its contemporaries. While some argued that the curvaceous design gave the car a certain charm, many others felt it made the vehicle look clumsy and overweight. The front end of the Taunus P3 was particularly polarizing. It featured a broad, flat grille that extended across the car's face, flanked by simple, round headlights. The grille's horizontal lines were meant to emphasize width, but instead they contributed to a bland, uninspired look. The headlights, rather than adding character, seemed to float awkwardly in the oversized grille, making the car's face look unfinished or hastily designed. The side profile didn't do the car any favors either. The P3's high belt line and prominent wheel arches were supposed to make it look robust, but combined with the overly rounded roof and slab-like doors, they gave the car a top-heavy, awkward stance. The lack of sharp creases or defined body lines made the P3 appear almost featureless from the side, as though it had been carved from a single, unrefined block of metal. The large glass area, while practical for visibility, further accentuated the car's bulbous nature, making the design look even more unbalanced. At the rear, the Taunus P3 continued its theme of simplicity gone wrong. The trunk was short and rounded, blending almost seamlessly into the rear bumper. This lack of definition made the car appear to sag at the back, as though it were struggling to support its own weight. The taillights were small and nondescript, providing no relief from the otherwise monotonous design. Combined with the oversized fenders, the rear end of the P3 felt heavy and uncoordinated. Inside, the P3 was more functional than fashionable. The dashboard was utilitarian, with a simple arrangement of gauges and controls. While it offered decent interior space and comfort for its class, the plain design of the cabin did little to offset the car's controversial exterior. Ford had clearly prioritized practicality over style, which may have been the right choice for some buyers, but left the car feeling uninspired overall. Underneath the peculiar design, the P3 did have some redeeming qualities. It was relatively advanced for its time, featuring independent suspension and a range of efficient four-cylinder engines. These engineering choices made the car comfortable to drive and economical to own, which appealed to many buyers in post-war Europe. However, these practical benefits were often overshadowed by the car's oddball looks, which made it hard for some consumers to take it seriously. Despite its divisive design, the Ford Taunus P3 found success in its home market, selling over 670,000 units between 1960 and 1964. This was partly due to Ford's strong reputation in Germany and the car's competitive pricing. However, outside of its core audience, the P3 struggled to gain acceptance, with its bathtub nickname becoming a lasting reminder of its unconventional aesthetics. In hindsight, the P3's design can be seen as a bold experiment in breaking away from traditional car styling of the time. While its rounded, organic shapes were ahead of their time in some respects, foreshadowing the softer lines of cars in the late 1960s and 1970s, they were poorly received in the more conservative automotive landscape of the early 1960s. Today, the Taunus P3 is regarded as a quirky relic, loved by some for its uniqueness and dismissed by others as an unfortunate misstep in Ford's design history. For better or worse, it remains a car that is impossible to ignore. The 1960 Ford Falcon Ranchero stands as an intriguing example of automotive innovation gone awry. Designed as a hybrid between a small family car and a pickup truck, the Ranchero was Ford's attempt to offer practicality in a compact package for buyers who needed a vehicle that could serve both as a personal car and a utility vehicle. The idea itself was bold, but the execution left much to be desired, resulting in a car that seemed to struggle with its identity. In essence, the Falcon Ranchero looked like two conflicting vehicles, each trying to outshine the other, colliding in a mismatched and visually jarring way. The design of the 1960 Ranchero began with the Ford Falcon, a small, compact sedan that was part of Ford's ambitious push into the economy car market. The Falcon's design was simple, featuring soft, rounded lines, a modest grille, and a relatively compact shape. It was a perfect car for its target audience, families and young drivers looking for something affordable and easy to maintain. However, when Ford chose to use the same basic structure for the Ranchero, a vehicle that was supposed to embody strength and utility, the design began to show cracks. The most glaring issue with the Falcon Ranchero's design was its awkwardly mismatched proportions. The front end, lifted directly from the Falcon, had a delicate and small appearance, with its narrow grille and small, spaced-out headlights. While this looked fine on a family sedan, it seemed out of place on a vehicle that was supposed to offer utility and ruggedness. The front end's subtle curves and rounded shapes clashed with the more utilitarian lines of the truck bed, which was added as an afterthought, making the overall vehicle look like a strange fusion of two different eras and styles. The truck bed itself, with its flat sides and minimalistic design, was too short and stowy, making the whole thing look unbalanced. It had the presence of a truck, but lacked the bulk that gives pickups their commanding stance. The transition from the car's smooth body to the truck bed felt too abrupt, leaving the Ranchero looking more like a mismatched patchwork of parts rather than a cohesive design. The rear of the vehicle did little to improve the situation. The tailgate was flat and featureless, with nothing more than a simple badge to break up the monotony of the design. The taillights were small and unremarkable, offering no real visual interest. This lack of detail made the rear end look unfinished, almost like an afterthought compared to the more carefully designed sedans and wagons of the time. While the Falcon itself had a simple charm, it was hard to apply the same aesthetic to a vehicle that was trying to pull double duty as both a family car and a workhorse. Inside, the Ranchero was very much a car, not a truck. The interior was borrowed from the Ford Falcon sedan, which meant it was simple, comfortable, and relatively well-equipped for its time. However, for a vehicle that was supposed to offer utility, it lacked the toughness and practicality one might expect. The dashboard was basic and functional, lacking any distinguishing features, while the seats, though comfortable, were not designed for the rigors of work or long, rough trips that truck owners might need. For those seeking a more rugged or refined interior, the Ranchero's car-like cabin would have seemed out of place. As a result, it left owners in a position where they had a vehicle that was neither a fully functional truck nor a true family sedan. Mechanically, the 1960 Ford Falcon Ranchero offered a range of powertrain options. Buyers could choose between an inline-six engine or a more powerful V8, with the latter providing better performance. However, despite the V8's muscle, the Ranchero was still a relatively lightweight vehicle, which meant that even with the extra power, it lacked the true towing and hauling capacity of full-size trucks. Its small size, relatively weak drivetrain, and light construction made it ill-suited for anything beyond light-duty work. In essence, it was too small to be a real truck and too unwieldy to be a compact car. As a result, the Falcon Ranchero never quite fulfilled the promise it set out to deliver. Performance-wise, the Ranchero was adequate but far from impressive. The V8 engine, while providing a boost in power, was still outclassed by more capable trucks in terms of towing ability and overall performance. The Falcon Ranchero, though quick off the line, did not handle heavy loads well. Its suspension system, designed for a compact car, wasn't built to handle the stress of carrying anything more than light cargo, which meant that the vehicle would often ride rough when loaded up. This compromise of power and utility further hampered its appeal among buyers who needed a vehicle that could do more than just cruise around town. Though the design flaws were apparent, the Falcon Ranchero found a niche market. The 1968 Marcos Mantis XP is a car that attempts to stand out in a crowd, but ultimately does so in a way that leaves much to be desired in terms of aesthetics. Manufactured by the British automaker Marcos Engineering, the Mantis XP was intended as a high-performance sports car that could rival the best of European competitors. Unfortunately, while the car's engineering and performance capabilities might have earned it some attention, its design choices have aged poorly, leaving it as one of the more awkward and visually unappealing vehicles from its era. The most striking and often criticized feature of the Marcos Mantis XP is its long, bulbous nose. This design feature is perhaps the most disproportionate aspect of the car. While it's common for sports cars to have a long, sleek front end that enhances their road presence, the Mantis XP's nose goes beyond this aesthetic norm. The front end appears to stretch on endlessly, giving the car an unbalanced and awkward stance. Instead of evoking power and performance, the long nose seems to weigh the car down, making the rest of the body appear too short and almost stubby. The proportions of the car simply don't match up, and the long nose creates an awkward silhouette that detracts from the sleek, aggressive lines expected of a sports car. Adding to this visual oddity are the car's oversized, bug-eyed headlights. These headlights, placed unusually far apart, seem out of place on such a low-slung vehicle. Instead of integrating into the overall design in a cohesive way, they protrude and draw attention away from the car's bodywork. Their round, bulging appearance adds to the disjointed look of the Mantis XP, making it appear more like a cartoonish or alien creation rather than a sophisticated road-going machine. In some ways, the headlights are so prominent that they take center stage in the car's design, making the rest of the car seem secondary, as if they were an afterthought. The Mantis XP's low-slung body, although typical of the sports car genre, only amplifies the awkwardness of its proportions. The car's minimal ground clearance, combined with the long nose, makes it look cramped and unbalanced. The front of the car appears to dip too low to the ground, giving the Mantis XP a squashed appearance, while the rear section, though shorter, doesn't compensate for the front end's heaviness. It feels as though the bodywork struggles to flow cohesively, with sharp lines and angles that clash rather than complement one another. The rear end of the car offers no relief from its front heavy proportions. The tail section is short and unsophisticated, with a basic design that fails to bring the car's appearance together in a way that feels polished. The overall body shape lacks the grace or sleekness that one might expect from a high-performance vehicle, making the car feel more awkward than elegant. The Mantis XP is a car that doesn't age well visually, and its outdated, boxy design elements give it an almost utilitarian look, rather than the sophisticated flair one might expect from a British sports car. Despite these design failures, the Marcos Mantis XP did have some redeeming qualities. Performance-wise, it was a relatively capable sports car, equipped with a variety of engine options, including a 3.0L V6 and a V8 in certain models. The Mantis XP was capable of quick acceleration and agile handling. The lightweight fiberglass body was an asset, allowing for nimbleness on the road and track. It was a car that could deliver on performance, but unfortunately, its performance was overshadowed by its poor aesthetics. Driving the Mantis XP was an experience that could be described as both exhilarating and frustrating. The car's handling was often praised by those who drove it, with its lightweight body and precise steering offering a connection to the road that was rare for its time. However, the looks of the Mantis XP often led to more mixed reactions, with many critics unable to get past the car's awkward proportions and unconventional design. The car may have been fast and agile, but it failed to capture the elegance and beauty that many sports car enthusiasts crave. In retrospect, the 1968 Marcos Mantis XP stands as a curious example of a car that could have been something special, but its design choices ultimately kept it from achieving that potential. While the engineering may have been sound and the performance may have been up to par, the Mantis XP's odd proportions, alien-like headlights, and discordant bodywork have led to its legacy being one of visual confusion. For collectors or those with an appreciation for quirky automotive history, the Mantis XP holds a certain charm, but it's hard to ignore the fact that, in terms of looks, it simply missed the mark. The 1964 Peel Trident, produced in the Isle of Man by Peel Engineering, is often regarded as one of the most unusual and, for many, unattractive cars ever made. A microcar designed for a very specific market, the Trident's diminutive size and outlandish design have made it a curious relic of the 1960s. Although its design was aimed at making a fun, compact vehicle, its aesthetic choices resulted in a car that looked more like a bomb or a spaceship than an actual roadworthy vehicle. One of the most striking and often criticized features of the Peel Trident is its tiny, egg-shaped body. At just over 4 feet wide and around 8 feet long, the Trident's proportions are more akin to those of a miniature toy car than a serious mode of transportation. The narrow width and short length create a design that feels constricted, almost as if the car was squished into a shape that defies the traditional form of a vehicle. Its bulging sides and rounded front end are reminiscent of an overstuffed egg, giving it a whimsical and awkward look that many find unappealing. While its compact dimensions were meant to make the Trident easy to park and maneuver, they ultimately contributed to its quirky, unattractive silhouette. The car's most defining feature is its bubble canopy, which covers the entire cabin, enclosing the driver and passenger in a plastic bubble. While this canopy was certainly an innovative design choice for a microcar, it also contributed to the vehicle's toy-like appearance. The dome-like canopy, combined with the Trident's stubby body, gave the car an otherworldly look, resembling more of a spaceship than a terrestrial automobile. Instead of blending in with the cars of its time, the Trident seemed to stand apart as something wholly out of place in the world of 1960s motoring. The bubble canopy, though practical in some ways, only amplified the feeling that the car was a futuristic experiment rather than a viable, everyday vehicle. The proportions of the Trident, with its overly rounded body and tiny wheels, make the car appear even more awkward. The wheels look disproportionately small compared to the rest of the vehicle, emphasizing the Trident's diminutive nature and contributing to its toy car vibe. The thin tires further accentuate the feeling that the car isn't really meant to be driven on real roads, but instead placed on a shelf as a collector's item. The tiny wheels and bulging body give the car an unbalanced, top-heavy appearance, which makes it look far less capable than it actually was. Even the car's rear end offers little in terms of redemption. The back of the Peel Trident is just as rounded and overly simplistic as the front, with few distinguishing features. There's a small, almost comically insignificant rear bumper, and the entire rear section seems to be an afterthought. The back of the car doesn't flow with the design in any cohesive way. It feels like the designers focused too much on creating a compact, functional cabin and forgot to give any attention to the overall balance of the car's proportions. Despite its odd appearance, the Peel Trident was, in some ways, a functional vehicle. Powered by a small 49cc engine, it could reach speeds of up to 28 mph, making it suitable for short trips in urban environments. However, the car's lack of conventional car features, such as doors, real safety features, or a proper trunk, meant that it was more of a novelty than a practical mode of transportation. The Trident's single-seat design was awkward for more than one person, and its bubble canopy offered limited visibility and ventilation, making it a challenging vehicle to use on a daily basis. In the end, the 1964 Peel Trident's aesthetic choices made it more of a conversation piece than a desirable car. Its egg-shaped body, bubble canopy, and tiny dimensions made it stand out, but not in a way that made it attractive to most buyers. While its status as a microcar and its role in the evolution of small, efficient vehicles are noteworthy, the Trident remains a design that most people would not consider aesthetically pleasing. For some, the oddness of the Trident gives it a certain charm, but for many, it's simply a car that never quite made sense in terms of style, practicality, or proportion. It remains one of the most curious and visually unappealing vehicles of the 1960s. The 1960 Checker Marathon is often remembered as a vehicle that epitomized function over form, a car built with a singular purpose in mind: practicality. Its design, while solidly engineered for its role as a taxi and work vehicle, did little to impress in the aesthetics department. This utilitarian approach, while well-suited to its intended function, left the Marathon lacking the sleek elegance that typified the automotive designs of the 1960s. At first glance, the most striking feature of the Checker Marathon is its boxy, blocky shape. In an era where cars were increasingly embracing curvier, more aerodynamic designs, the Marathon stood out like a relic from another time. Its angular silhouette was defined by sharp lines and flat panels, which gave it an imposing and almost brute-like presence on the road. The body of the car was designed with the utmost practicality in mind, maximizing passenger space and cargo capacity. But this focus on utility came at the expense of elegance or fluidity in design. It lacked the graceful curves and flowing lines that made other cars of the era stand out. The Marathon's profile was almost caricature-like, with no attempt made to soften its harsh, functional features. The front end of the Checker Marathon was dominated by a large, rectangular grille that was neither particularly stylish nor aesthetically pleasing. The grille, while effective in terms of air intake and cooling, gave the car an aggressive, almost menacing look, emphasizing its role as a workhorse rather than a luxury vehicle. The headlights, large and round, were placed high up on the front fenders, adding to the utilitarian, no-nonsense vibe that the Marathon exuded. There was no attempt to integrate the headlights into a sleek, smooth front-end design, which made the car feel clunky and disproportionate. The bodywork seemed to have no particular concern for symmetry or visual appeal, leaving the Marathon looking more like a box on wheels than a carefully crafted automobile. The sheer size of the Marathon was another factor that contributed to its lack of visual appeal. Stretching nearly 17 feet in length, it was a car that commanded attention simply because of its massive proportions. While this bulk allowed for plenty of interior space and cargo room, it also gave the car an ungainly look. It felt like a vehicle built more for function than to inspire admiration. The large, flat roofline and extended wheelbase created a sense of heaviness, as though the car was slowly lumbering down the road rather than gliding. The rear end of the Marathon was equally uninspired, with no real attention to aerodynamics or streamlined design. The trunk area was boxy and square, further emphasizing the vehicle's utilitarian nature. Even the tail fins, which had been a popular design feature in American cars during the late 1950s and early 1960s, were absent from the Marathon, leaving the rear end to look unfinished and awkward. Inside the cabin, the Marathon continued its focus on practicality rather than aesthetics. The large, expansive interior provided ample room for passengers and luggage, but the materials used were cheap and rudimentary, with little thought given to luxury or comfort. The upholstery was simple, utilitarian fabric or vinyl, designed to withstand heavy use rather than to provide a plush, inviting atmosphere. While the seats were large and spacious, they lacked the refinement or attention to detail that would have made the interior feel luxurious or even comfortable for long trips. The dashboard was basic, with simple controls and an emphasis on durability rather than style. There was no attempt to integrate design flair or innovation into the interior, just functional, no-nonsense materials and features. The car's performance, while adequate for its intended purpose, was far from thrilling. The engine, a straight 6, was powerful enough to carry the car's substantial weight, but it lacked the refinement or performance characteristics that many other cars of the era possessed. It was not fast by any means, and its acceleration was sluggish, which was to be expected from a car built more for comfort and utility than for speed. The ride, however, was smooth and relatively comfortable, with the car's suspension designed to absorb the bumps and dips of city streets, making it ideal for long hours of taxi driving. The heavy weight of the vehicle, however, did mean that it handled more like a truck than a passenger sedan, making it cumbersome and unwieldy in tight city spaces. Despite being equipped with basic safety features, the Marathon's sheer size and lack of modern performance technology meant that it was not the most agile or responsive vehicle on the road. One of the most notable aspects of the Checker Marathon, however, was its reputation for durability and reliability. Built for the taxi industry, it was designed to endure the rigors of constant use and frequent driving. The 1965 Bond Bug is one of the most peculiar cars ever designed, and its unique, quirky characteristics are difficult to overlook. From its three-wheeled configuration to its oddly shaped wedge body, the Bond Bug was a car that defied traditional design expectations. While many cars from the 1960s are known for their sleek lines and innovative designs, the Bond Bug was anything but conventional. Its appearance was a mix of ambitious creativity and a complete disregard for established automotive norms, resulting in a car that was more of an oddity than a serious contender in the automotive world. Perhaps the most striking feature of the Bonbug was its three-wheeled design. While three-wheeled vehicles have existed throughout automotive history, they are often considered impractical or even unstable compared to their four-wheeled counterparts. The single rear wheel, placed directly under the engine, gave the car an unbalanced, almost precarious stance. The front of the car was flanked by two wheels, while the rear wheel seemed to do the bulk of the work. This design made the Bonbug appear top-heavy, as though the car was constantly on the verge of tipping over. The asymmetry of the three-wheeled layout didn't inspire confidence in drivers, and many felt it compromised the vehicle's stability, especially during turns or high-speed maneuvers. The body of the Bonbug was equally unusual, characterized by its sharp, angular lines. While the intention might have been to create a futuristic, aerodynamic shape, the reality was less elegant. The wedge-shaped body looked more like a misshapen block than a vehicle built for smooth, efficient movement. The car's flat sides and angular edges gave it a boxy appearance, devoid of the graceful curves that most cars of the era embraced. The sharp angles and lack of fluid design language made the Bonbug look more like a go-kart than a roadworthy automobile. Its awkward proportions, with a long, stretched nose and an awkward rear end, failed to achieve the sleekness typically seen in contemporary designs. Instead of appearing fast or dynamic, the car looked like a child's toy or a strange prototype that had never quite been perfected. In addition to its unorthodox shape, the Bonbug's bright orange color only added to its cartoonish appearance. The vivid hue was certainly eye-catching, but it did little to enhance the car's aesthetics. The orange color made the car stand out, yes, but it also accentuated the oddness of the design. Instead of making the car appear bold or modern, it made it seem garish and impractical. The bright shade highlighted the strange body lines and exaggerated angles, turning the Bonbug into a rolling spectacle that seemed out of place in the world of serious automobiles. The bright orange, while a bold choice, did not serve the car's design well, and instead created a sense of cartoonishness that only added to its already polarizing look. Another curious aspect of the Bonbug was its overall design philosophy. The car was meant to be a compact, lightweight, and affordable vehicle for practical urban use. But while it was small and easy to maneuver, the lack of refinement in its design left much to be desired. The three-wheel configuration, while undoubtedly making the car more maneuverable, also contributed to a rough ride. The car's tiny dimensions made it feel cramped inside, and while it was functional for short trips, it lacked the comfort and stability that many drivers would seek for regular use. The odd configuration of the car made it impractical for long-distance drives or even daily commuting for some. The absence of modern creature comforts like air conditioning, spacious interiors, and sound insulation made it feel more like a novelty than a genuine transportation solution. The Bonbug's canopy-like roof, which was hinged to the side and had to be lifted for entry, was another feature that showcased the car's lack of refinement. Getting in and out of the vehicle was cumbersome and impractical, especially for anyone who wasn't physically nimble. The lack of traditional doors and the awkward method of entry made the car more of a challenge to use than a fun, quirky ride. Additionally, the lack of weatherproofing and the small size of the cabin made it uncomfortable for long trips or for driving in inclement weather. The interior of the Bonbug did little to redeem its exterior. With its minimalistic design, the cabin was functional at best, but lacked the refinement and comfort that many drivers would expect, especially from a vehicle that was marketed as a car for everyday use. The seats were basic and the dashboard was sparse, with minimal controls and no attention to ergonomic design. The lack of interior features made the driving experience feel bare bones, and the overall build quality didn't inspire confidence. The car was marketed as an affordable option for young urban drivers. The 1963 Studebaker Wagonaire is an interesting case in automotive design, but unfortunately, it's not a model that stands out for its beauty. While Studebaker's attempt to innovate with the sliding roof panel was a bold move, the execution left much to be desired. The Wagonaire was designed as a wagon that combined utility with a bit of flair, but the end result was a car that looked awkward and unrefined. The most distinctive feature of the Wagonaire was its sliding roof panel, which was a novel idea at the time. The concept was to offer the practicality of a station wagon with the added bonus of an open-air driving experience when needed. However, the design of the roof itself was problematic. The panel, which slid backward to reveal an open space above the rear passengers, wasn't executed in a way that was particularly elegant or seamless. When the roof was in place, it didn't blend well with the rest of the car's design, creating an odd visual imbalance. The rear section of the roof looked tacked on, almost as if it was an afterthought rather than an integrated feature. This, combined with the boxy overall shape of the car, made the Wagonaire look cumbersome rather than sleek. Speaking of its shape, the Wagonaire's body was very square and utilitarian. While many cars from the 1960s embraced sleek lines and more fluid, rounded shapes, the Wagonaire stuck to a blocky, angular design that looked out of place even at the time. The proportions were awkward, especially the rear, which felt disproportionately large compared to the more compact front end. The roofline was too tall for the car's overall length, and the rear end seemed overly bulky, especially with the wagon-style layout. The overall effect was a clunky, uninspired look that lacked the grace and dynamism that was characteristic of many of its contemporaries. The Wagonaire was functional, but its design didn't reflect the kind of forward-thinking, stylish appeal that many buyers were looking for in a new car. The front of the Wagonaire wasn't much better either. The grille and headlights seemed overly large for the vehicle's size, giving the car a somewhat cartoonish face. The flat rectangular grille and headlights were not only bulky, but lacked the fine detailing that could have added sophistication to the design. The front end was more about practicality and visibility than style, contributing to an overall sense that the car was designed to get the job done, rather than to look good doing it. One of the most striking things about the Wagonaire's design was how little it seemed to evolve from the typical station wagon of its era. The sliding roof, while unique, didn't add enough to the car's overall aesthetic to make it stand out. The rest of the design was simply a basic wagon layout with some minor attempts at distinguishing itself. Its lack of refinement, paired with its boxy and disproportionate shape, made it look more like a utilitarian work vehicle than something to be admired for its design. The attempt to offer an open-air experience through the roof panel was novel, but the awkward execution undermined any potential cool factor. In terms of practicality, the Wagonaire did have its merits. The sliding roof allowed for extra cargo space, which was a selling point for those looking for a station wagon that could handle larger loads. But when it came to style, it was clear that the Wagonaire wasn't in the same league as other vehicles of its era. The design was simply too clunky, too boxy, and too unrefined to be considered anything other than an oddity in the automotive world. Today, the Studebaker Wagonaire is remembered more for its attempt at innovation than for its visual appeal. While its sliding roof was an interesting concept, it couldn't save the car from its awkward, uninspired overall design. The Wagonaire's boxy body, unbalanced proportions, and outdated styling make it a car that hasn't aged particularly well, at least in terms of aesthetics. It was a car that tried to do something different, but ultimately ended up looking like a forgotten relic of an era that was ready to move on to more streamlined, modern designs. The Wagonaire was practical, but unfortunately it was also ugly, an odd mixture of utilitarian function and awkward, uninspired form. The 1969 Subaru 360 holds a unique place in automotive history, but its design certainly hasn't aged gracefully, and it was far from being an iconic beauty when it was first released. This compact microcar was built for practicality rather than aesthetics, but even within its practical constraints, the 360 often failed to win fans based on its looks. It was a vehicle designed to meet specific needs: urban transportation, small miles, and affordability, yet its visual appearance made it stand out in ways that weren't entirely flattering. At first glance, the 360's most striking feature was its odd, egg-shaped body. The car was incredibly small, so small in fact that it looked more like a tiny than a functional vehicle for adults. Its rounded, bulbous design didn't adhere to the sleek, angular lines that defined many cars of the 1960s. but instead took on a rather awkward and disproportionate look. The design was far from graceful, more like a rolling, oversized toy than a serious contender in the automotive market. The fact that the body had such exaggerated curves made it look like it was struggling to be something it wasn't, a full-size car. Instead of capturing the elegance of small, efficient cars like the Fiat 500 or the Mini Cooper, the Subaru 360 seemed content with a basic, clunky shape that didn't quite fit in with the modern era. Another striking feature of the Subaru 360 was its oversized headlights. These bulbous, cartoonish eyes seemed to take over the front of the car, making it appear as though it had been designed by a child or a toy manufacturer. In contrast to the more balanced and minimalist designs of other small cars, the Subaru 360 featured headlights that were too big for the body, giving it an exaggerated, almost comical appearance. The headlights were positioned high on the fenders and looked disproportionate to the rest of the car, making the 360 seem more like a caricature of a car rather than a serious vehicle. This quirkiness in its design didn't give the car a sense of charm or personality. It simply highlighted how misaligned the design was with what was typical or desirable for a vehicle of the time. The rear of the Subaru 360 didn't fare any better. Rather than having a sleek or distinctive back end, the rear was flat and boxy, as if designed purely for function rather than form. This utilitarian, uninspired shape lacked the character or attention to detail that could have turned it into a design statement. While other cars of the time were experimenting with innovative designs that captured both functionality and style, the Subaru 360's rear was simple, basic, and frankly, rather forgettable. It didn't have the streamlined look that other small cars like the Mini or the Citroen 2CV possessed. It simply looked like a compact, economical vehicle without much thought given to how it presented itself. The rear end looked more like an afterthought, with no attempt to complement the rounded shape of the front or provide any visual flow to the car's overall design. The proportions of the Subaru 360 also contributed to its awkwardness. The body had a very high roofline, making the car appear somewhat top-heavy, and it didn't have the balanced, low-slung appearance that many small cars were known for. The tiny body with its oversized windows and narrow stance left it looking out of proportion, almost like it had been squished down from a larger vehicle, making it appear somewhat awkward and unrefined. While other small cars of the time aimed for stylish compactness, the 360's form seemed clunky and unpolished. It was as if the designers were more concerned with making a functional city car than worrying about how the car looked on the road. Perhaps what made the Subaru 360 stand out the most was its lack of flair. While other cars from the same era were experimenting with bold new styles, think of the cheeky charm of the Fiat 500 or the futuristic curves of the Renault 4. The Subaru 360 was basic and devoid of the playful or striking visual appeal that could have made it a favorite among automotive enthusiasts. The car's design was purely functional and served a clear, practical purpose. However, it did so at the cost of being unremarkable, uninspiring, and not particularly pleasing to the eye. The 360's design wasn't forward-thinking or innovative in terms of aesthetics, and it didn't push any boundaries. Instead, it stuck to a traditional, utilitarian approach that left it looking outdated and, in some ways, irrelevant to the more stylish and modern cars that were hitting the market at the time. It's easy to see why the Subaru 360 was sometimes the subject of ridicule for its odd design. While some people may have appreciated it for its practicality, others found its appearance to be a bit of a joke. The exaggerated proportions, awkward rear, oversized headlights, and overall lack of visual cohesion made it stand out for all the wrong reasons. The 1967 Mazda Luce remains one of those vehicles that reflects the automotive industry's struggle to balance utility and flair during an era when design was rapidly evolving. While other cars from the 1960s pushed the boundaries of style and innovation, the Mazda Luce missed the opportunity to make a lasting impact. It was a car that played it safe, offering a design that was square and boxy, a model that was functional but ultimately forgettable. In many ways, the Luce stands as a symbol of missed potential in the automotive world. A vehicle that could have been something far more exciting, but instead leaned heavily on mediocrity. First and foremost, the design of the Luce was uninspired and lacked the boldness of its contemporaries. The front end of the car, which should have been its most eye-catching feature, instead presented a bland, uninspiring face. The grille was one of the most striking aspects of the Luce, but rather than being something that demanded attention or admiration, it was basic and functional. The grille's design was almost too conventional, with no real effort put into making it stand out from the crowd. It lacked the intricate detailing that would have elevated the car's character, leaving the front end feeling flat and unremarkable. The headlights, similarly, were standard and lacked the visual intrigue that could have made the car more distinctive. The overall shape of the Mazda Luce was another area where it faltered. Its design leaned heavily on the boxy sedan trends that were prevalent in the 1960s. But unlike other vehicles from that time that made boxy shapes look sleek and purposeful, the Luce just appeared awkward. The body was far from graceful, with sharp, angular lines that failed to integrate harmoniously. The proportions of the car were disproportionate, with certain sections feeling out of place compared to the rest of the vehicle. The front end, for example, felt a bit too long in relation to the rear, which made the entire car seem less balanced. Instead of presenting a flowing silhouette, the Luce's design felt static and rigid, a car that couldn't decide whether it wanted to be modern or conservative. Looking at the rear of the Mazda Luce, it was clear that the car's design wasn't fully thought through. The rear end was functional but dull, with no distinctive features to grab attention. While some cars from the era embraced bold rear designs, think of the iconic rear ends of some American muscle cars, the Luce had nothing to offer in terms of visual drama. The taillights were basic and unadorned, and the flat rear end only contributed to the car's lack of visual interest. It's as if the rear was designed merely to fulfill the practical requirements of the car rather than to contribute to a cohesive and exciting overall aesthetic. There was no flair, no excitement, just a lack of effort that left the car feeling unfinished in some respects. Inside, the Mazda Luce continued its trend of underwhelming design. While it may have offered comfort and practicality, the interior was far from memorable. The dashboard was plain, and the materials used were basic at best, without the refinement or elegance that some of its competitors were offering at the time. The seats and upholstery were standard, with no luxurious touches or innovative features that could have elevated the car's interior. In fact, the interior of the Luce seemed almost like an afterthought, a place where the function was the primary concern rather than offering a driving experience that could excite or engage the senses. On the road, the Mazda Luce was undoubtedly a competent car, offering reliable performance for its time. However, it was far from thrilling. It wasn't a car that begged to be driven enthusiastically, nor was it one that sparked any emotional connection with its owners. While it did what was expected of it, the lack of excitement in its design and driving experience only served to reinforce its status as a forgettable vehicle. It was a car built for those who valued function over form, and while that's a valid approach, it didn't win the Luce any design accolades or place it in the hearts of car enthusiasts. When we look back on the 1967 Mazda Luce, we see a car that was simply overshadowed by the era's more dynamic and innovative designs. Cars like the Ford Mustang, the Chevrolet Camaro, or even the Jaguar E-Type, with their curvaceous lines and thrilling performance, became icons because they represented the height of automotive design and passion. The Luce, on the other hand, was a well-built, functional car that lacked the boldness, the personality, and the excitement to stand out in an era of automotive innovation. It didn't try to push the envelope. It didn't try to be more than it was. As a result, it remains a forgotten relic, a car that missed the opportunity to capture the imagination of drivers and car lovers alike.